Welcome to Slash Forward. What would you do if you unexpectedly gave birth to an adult male swamp creature's head? A question explored but left unanswered by the 2016 film Antibirth. For more support dealing with the trauma of an alien abduction, subscribe to the channel. Let's get to it. We open on a rundown industrial building, the inside of which contains a raging punk rave, whose participants are really feeling the groove and leaving it all on the dance floor. Lou, heavily under the influence, is led off the floor by Warren, a man who can't possibly have good intentions if we're going based solely on appearance. Yeah, I said it. When we catch up with her again, we hear she's been feeling ill for a couple of days and has pains all over. Anna decides to cut right to it.
When was the time of your last period?
And recommends she see a doctor since, as a veterinarian's assistant, she has nothing to offer other than an unused container of prenatals in her cupboard. Instead, the ladies go scavenging for booze and snacks. While making their selections, Lou confirms she hasn't been sexually active in months, so she doubts pregnancy is the culprit of her symptoms. Sadie, however, recommends she go ahead and hop off her bender for a few days to let things even out a bit in her body. Kinda like an elimination diet, but for controlled substances. And even though they haven't yet ruled out that she's suffering from the whiskey shits, they begin proactively discussing possible options for how to handle the pregnancy, getting a little ahead of themselves. We then swoop back in with Warren, who we find is working for Gabriel, and they're engaged in the business of harvesting clean urine for drug testing. Gabe has to run Trish off from the fridge as he also recently acquired a stash of some new designer drug the street kids are gonna go absolutely nuts over. Once he figures out how to cut it, here, Warren cryptically asks what the plan is for Lou, but all we learn is they intend to do nothing, as they presume she would not be credible if she attempted to rat on them. So Warren proceeds with his day, making piss deliveries to their clientele. Meanwhile, the ladies return to Lou's inherited trailer. After putting on a record and getting sufficiently grooved out, Lou takes a rip off her bong before letting the microwave tickle her little party crasher with its radioactive energy. Lou then engages in a deep analysis of the merits of Beastmaster before her corn dogs explode, filling the trailer with an ominous smoke. That evening, at an isolated gas station, a woman rolls up and takes a few minutes to caress one of the missing posters. A couple of Gabe's boys pull up and start scoping out her ride. She requests their departure and manages to avoid an involuntary future career in the sex trade via her trusty buck knife. Back at the trailer, Lou is busy trying to piece together what she remembers about her night with Warren, but is drawing a total blank. She then recognizes that she is completely broke and will need to pick up a shift if she wants to keep partying, and maybe a few extra if she actually ends up being preggers. She and Sadie push past this to go do some miniature bowling, which happens to be the same spot where Gabe runs his drug and prostitution venture. He has his ladies take the dudes out back to make love in a Buick, and while hard at work, a strange man walks up to take a peek. Gabe's enforcer attempts to preserve the sanctity of the car shenanigans, but the man is just enamored with the process of human procreative sex, so he lingers to get his fill, and once he's topped off, he willingly backs away into the night. We return to the trailer at daytime, where Lou wakes up to discover she's suffering from discouragingly gooey nipples. But she pushes through, getting dressed as Luke arrives to give her a ride into town. She hits him up for a solid, asking him to retrieve a pregnancy test for her. And while he's in there, Lou is accosted by a very aggressive tweaker who gets run off by Luke. Luke suspects that Gabe's new stuff is getting the junkies about town all riled up. Lou, however, believes Gabe is full of crap and just a washed-out loser with a brain addled by all the tests performed on him while he was in the military. Lou then heads into work where the two ladies get geared up for some cleaning. As she begins turn-down service, she's struck by a sudden bout of bubble gut, which causes her to puke. It also knocks loose some repressed memories that seem to indicate some strange things went down in that industrial tunnel. She wakes up later to find Lorna in her room. She had left something behind and came to retrieve it. Finding Lou passed out in the bathroom, she helped her into bed and hopes to exchange some of that goodwill for a simple conversation as she's very lonely. But Lou has some rooms to clean and welcomes her to head for the mountains. Lou then finishes her shift and walks home. Later, Lou and Sadie are back at it, boozing and snacking and pondering the odds of Lou being pregnant. Lou figures she would be unable to conceive as she recounts the charming story of when she had to jump off the dance floor at the club to have a sudden and surprising discharge in the bathroom. And that was about 6 months ago and she hasn't had sex since then, so she's fairly confident of her status. Nonetheless, she heads in to take the test and promises to call Sadie with any news about the outcome. Meanwhile, Warren arrives at the piss lab looking for Gabe, but instead finds Jade, stinking on the floor as something has clearly gone wrong. Concurrent with this, Lou discovers encouragingly that the impossible sometimes is possible. This discovery comes with the subsequent discoveries that she has some sort of strange markings on one side of her neck and a whole sheet of superfluous skin on the other. We find Gabe blasting out some sets back back at his base when Warren shows up. He delivers the news about Jade, and we learn that he was working on figuring out the best way to split up the new stuff. They figure that he didn't do a particularly good job, and also likely got a little too eager with testing the product. It distresses Sadie to learn that they didn't fully establish the safety of their product before administering an unknown dosage to Lou. Back at the trailer, Lou is barely able to get over her fresh body horror when the trailer takes to shaking violently, followed by what seems like someone trying to get in the front door. She ends up keeping an all-night vigil through several seasons, apparently, and dreams of that one pervert giving her a pep talk about her bright future. This then transitions to a nightmare, in which a couple of Teletubbies give her an ultrasound before she wakes up the next morning. She then crawls over to the counter to try to get herself upright, which is a difficult proposition considering her now bulging uterus. Along with that, she has the normal swelling of her lower extremities that accompany pregnancy and discovers that her feet are basically nothing but blister at this point. She opens it up to relieve the pain, and she does have some toilet paper for dressing, so it should heal up pretty well. An unknown amount of time later, she wakes up to a knock at her door. It's Lorna, and she's at her trailer now. She pushes her way in to get out of the cold, even though no one invited her, and claims to be here to help and has a general idea of what Lou's symptoms are. Turns out, Lorna went through a similar situation and had no one, and wants to make sure it's not like that for Lou. Lou agrees to accept her help, and they head off to get some food. Along the way, we learn that Lou's father was a military man and that Laura was enlisted as well. She worked with the radar team and tells a spooky story about a time they were laid out by some sort of tremendous humming light. She's not sure what it was, but she has some sort of psychic powers now that allow her to sense the waves of trauma emanating off of others. They continue this conversation all the way to the fun zone, where they've stopped for lunch and to ruin some kid's party. Here they meet up with Warren to see if he could provide any additional info about what happened. He claims that Gabe put him up to whatever it was, but what it was, even he is not sure about. He just knows Gabe was paying him and is in the employ of a mysterious man named Isaac. They express their displeasure with his actions and then proceed on their way. We then circle around to Gabriel and Sadie having a similar conversation, through which we learn that Gabe does, in fact, deliver women to the mysterious Isaac as one of his revenue streams, being an enterprising young entrepreneur, but he also doesn't know what the guy wants or how he's using the ladies. As Lou and Lorna arrive back at the trailer, they hit a bit of a dead end on what to do next. Lorna shares that at one point she had a foreign object in her arm that some alien-hungry group of freaks extracted from her. While Lou isn't necessarily concerned about this, Lorna points out to her that even if she doesn't believe in all that stuff, they do. So it still represents some danger to her. As Lorna continues to regale her with fairy tales of abduction and mutilation, Lou gets some rest and has her rancid feet tended to. In the morning, Sadie arrives with some coffee and donuts. She wants to check in on Lou's wellness, which she finds to be generally poor, prompting her to suggest she visit Gabe or possibly a hospital. Lou instead opts to revisit the party site to see if there's any evidence there about what happened to her. As they head that way, Lou begins to get the brain jitters again as her mind blossoms, and she churns up a memory of getting injected with something. She comes clean here, confirming that Gabe needed to test out his cheap drugs and utilized Lou as a guinea pig. Having acquired this info, they head back to the trailer again, where the labor pains begin to set in amidst a storm, which is a bad omen, and they begin to prep. While that's going on, Sadie reports back to Gabe, who wants more info about her condition so he can start selling his drugs. And we learn during this meeting that Isaac is the weird pervert we met previously, and he gives an order to bring Lou in. Gabe and his crony get to the trailer suited up for a SWAT mission, while inside, Lou is innocently preparing to run a rehearsal of her aerial show. Through the magic of gravity, she's soon crowning, and then gives birth to a beautiful baby swamp man. But before she can imprint on her newborn, the soldiers bust in and separate them, gunning Lorna down in the front yard. Gabriel begins to get a general sense that something strange is afoot, and Isaac puts the child to sleep so he can talk to Lou about being a vessel for his alien masters. Based on his experience with their home planet, he's concluded that she has sufficient conception capabilities due to her years of acclimation to hellish, toxic environments. Despite the fact that there's not much else going on with her right now, Lou still desires body autonomy, and she pursues this with extreme prejudice. Then we learn that the head was just a head, but there's still a whole adult body in there, the emergence of which totally empties Lou out, which is only a partially accurate depiction of birth, based on what I know. The final gunman then walks in to hear baby's first word. I have a website set up where you can support the channel through donations or merch. I'd like to take a moment to give a huge thanks to my donors memorialized in the Hall of Headshots. You know, this movie was strange, but I'm not sure if it was strange enough. It seems like if you want to delve into the surreal, you kinda have to go with a full measure in that direction, like St. Bernard. This movie does have some good bones to it, and I hope it finds its audience. If you enjoyed the video, I'd love for you to become a part of the channel by subscribing. Thanks for watching.